Go ahead and get started. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. This is the first of what hopefully will be many of these. Every quarter, we plan to do a Spur Relay, um, where Riley and our research team comes together and provides some of the interesting findings the last quarter. So, with that, Riley Kilmer, our co-founder of Spur, is joined today by Scott Simmons, our head of research from Spur Intelligence Labs. We're also joined by our VP of Product Marketing, Scott Lang. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. Next slide, there it is. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be delivered to your inbox probably tomorrow morning as soon as we get it. So it will be delivered to the email address that you used to register. During the session, we do have a lot of content here in the next hour or so. But please do, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask those questions. And we'll do our best to try to get to them at the end of the presentation. If not, you can always send us an email at communications@spur.us. So hopefully we have some time for Q&A at the end. If not, send those questions to us. With that, I'll shut up and get right to the content. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Riley and Sean. Thanks again for joining.
So for the very first relay, we're going to hit on a lot of topics, it feels like. But these are things that were really relevant in the last few months. Actually, most of these were in September, wouldn't you say, Sean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so cookie proxy, Sean's going to run through a little bit. Um, Back in, I don't know, I think we say September, I had launched a thing called ipcontext.me that would help people find their IP address and see if there's any residential proxies or things like that present, which actually came up with a really interesting story about AnyIP that we'll also run through. And then just talk about some of the more malicious and criminal proxy services and finalize with some, perspective in the counts of proxies that we've been seeing over the last 90 days and kind of what's surging. So with that, I'm gonna let Sean dive into Cookie.
Hey, everyone. So yeah, a couple months ago, we had a friend of Spur reach out to us and sort of tip us off to an app developer that was using their um, free game apps on Android and iOS to host an SDK for residential proxy servers called Cookie IP. Um, we sort of like dug into this app a little bit with this partner and got some indicators out of it. The KKOIP domain is what the app calls back to. Um, we actually ran this in a sandbox and saw how quick we could label it. And we had it labeled within a couple hours for three different services, which means that Cookie is reselling it to a couple different services. Um, the big overlaps there are ABC Proxy and NetNut, which are both two massive residential proxy services. They seem to rebuy anything they can, so it makes sense that they'd be buying from Cookie. We actually kind of had tracked Cookie in the past. They used to rebuy themselves, used to white label other services. Now they maintain their own pool. So let's move on a little bit and talk about that.
We'll definitely dive into the net numbers at the very end, which will kind of blow some people's minds about the total size of that pool. But yeah, they kind of show up everywhere.
So just for context, Cookie is a Chinese-based residential proxy service. I think they primarily um, have mobile devices under their IP pool. In this case, here's a little PCAP that shows the call out to KKOIP, which is their C2 domain. You can call it that if you want to. So this is sort of our first indicator here. We can go in and pivot on this in virus total and just see a bunch of APKs that have this relation that are calling out. A lot of these are from the same developer named Oakever Games. They're a massive game developer. They have got tens of millions of downloads on between Android and iOS. Huge game developer. And they all, or at least a lot of them, seem to be host to residential proxy software. So let's keep going. We picked one of these, a game called well, we'll see that in the next slide. So here's your their Play Store homepage basically. Um, it's kind of funny their verbiage here of empowering grown-ups to find their inner child and become truly life lovers. I thought that was really funny.
One of the
Um,
things that's interesting here, though, Sean, is that it being in Google Play, from what we could understand of the terms of service for Google Play, is that they don't allow these residential proxy SDKs to be embedded in them unless the service itself is already peer-to-peer. So this kind of definitely breaks the mold of that and should theoretically be easy to kick from the App Store if possible.
Yeah,
So
and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit, what ended up happening with this particular game. Yeah, you play these games and you're finding your inner child, but you're also becoming a proxy for this massive proxy company. Look at this, 100 million downloads on their top game here, which is obscene. So this is the app that we actually ended up running in our sandbox and playing with a little bit. Um, this is a game that your mom might install on her iPad, and I'm speaking from experience there because my mom loves these like just idle color crap games like this. So I have to keep tabs on her all the time to make sure she's not installing stuff like this. But tons of downloads, 10 million downloads, 200,000 reviews. So we actually, I'll skip to the end here. We worked with our friend who tipped us off to this and ended up getting this delisted from the Google Store. So you can't find this game anymore on the Play Store. But there are all the other games are still there. So every other game by Okiver Games is still there. I guess Google does it on a per app basis and not, carte blanche. Um, so we ran this app for a couple hours on an Android, I think it was a Galaxy device, and immediately had it labeled as these three services. Um, Pretty much simultaneously. So what's happening here is KKOIP and Kuki are reselling these to NetNut and ABC Proxy. Like I said, these are services who will buy any proxy they can get their hands on, no matter like it doesn't matter where it comes from, they'll buy anything pretty much. Nothing at all in the TOS on the Oakkeeper website or in the game TOS that you agree to when you install the game that mentions, hey, you're now a proxy in a giant proxy network. So that's sort of interesting. A lot of
question.
services, and we'll talk about this later, but a lot of services will put in their TOS somewhere buried deep in there that, you're opting into something. It's not pretty vague on what it is, but you're opting into something, whereas Oakkeeper had nothing about any of this. So go ahead, Riley.
Yeah, quick question. Did we ever tie Oak ever to Kuki? Like, or is it just that they happen to use the SDK, or do they own it?
Yeah, we never saw any like direct association between Oakkeeper and Kuki. Anyone can go use the KKOIP SDK and sign up and use their API and get rolling with this monetization vector. So that's all it is ultimately is, these are free apps. They've got millions of downloads. They can run ads, which make money, but also ads are annoying. So a lot of them will use this other vector of making money off their apps. And at 10 million installs, that's a lot. That's a lot of income coming in just from these proxy pools like Kuki.
To actually answer the question that popped up as it's going, since we're on this slide already, the three different proxies that are showing up here, our belief here is that Kuki Proxy is then selling their pool to other services like ABC Proxy and NetNut. So by me buying a service at NetNut and going through the process of enumerating it, to have their pool be as large as it is, they're buying from Kuki as well. So we're able to see these different services all correlate, which actually it's fairly interesting when we run these things.
Yeah, and this is just how the res proxy world works. I mean, there's a countless number of these res proxy services, but ultimately there's only a small handful of really big pools of IPs, and they sort of all mix and trade and deal and there's services that overlap multiple pools and services that overlap just one pool. The back end of the proxy networks is fascinating in terms of how like they deal and trade. So this is just one example of that. You can see NetNut and ABC are both services that will rebuy anything they can get their hands on. And in this case, Kuki is selling to them. So Kuki, in addition to running their own proxy service and selling the proxies themselves, they can also monetize their proxy pools by selling to other providers. So that's sort of what's going on here.
Yeah, so that to add to this, we did get the one game. Well, our partner did. They reached out to Google Play to have the one app delisted. Unfortunately, they didn't delist all the apps, so um, they should because all of them have the SDK present. But the first report was on the one color app, and it was limited to that.
Yeah. A lot of them have. I mean, I can't go and say that they all have it present, but based on what we saw, a lot of the apps that were calling back to that KKOIP were Oakkeeper apps. It's possible that there are some that just don't have it for whatever reason. That would require, a bit more digging in. So let's move on. So yeah, that was pretty much the end of Kuki. We now label that service really well. Um, But it's just really interesting to see them shift from kind of buying their own pool size to operating their own stuff now, which is tends to be what happens. These companies they start by reselling other major pools with the end goal of having their own SDK or their own app or whatever to monetize, other apps. So, the goal is to build up a pool, build up a customer base, and then pivot to you know, their own integrations. So,
Yeah,
uh,
being able to vertically integrate your whole business is like, the end goal, right? Like
for
Bright
all
Data
businesses, yeah, all
owns,
SaaSes, yeah.
yeah, Bright Data owns everything end to end, but it's really hard to build up that proxy pool unless you have customers. You have to start with customers by getting some proxies. It becomes just kind of this circular process, and a lot of these smaller companies have to start with white labeling. So.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll talk about NEIP now. Another big res proxy service. I think are they relatively new, Riley? I think they're
Honestly, I feel like when I first looked at them, they were one of those that was also reselling things, and I just didn't think much of them and didn't want to label them. But then we had somebody else reach out to us saying that they started offering their own SDK, and the second they offered their own SDK under their own name was when I thought that, we should probably put some effort in and start looking at them because they have their own proprietary pool.
yep. So same SDK world. This is just a way to monetize mobile apps. As Riley mentioned, we recently made an effort to find people who have res proxies on their networks that they're not aware of, and to reach out to us, and maybe we could work out, where the res proxy came from, what it's doing, where it is. We actually had a lot of success doing this, as she mentioned, and we had a couple really good users reach out to us, and we worked with them to sort of discover the res proxy on their network. So in this case, we had a really technical person who reached out to us, and was like, "Hey, we have any IP. I can see this in your data on my home network." He's a very technical guy. He's got full capture of his network. So he's like, let's just find this. Let's figure this out. So we spent a week hunting down this one res proxy in his network. With that had like at least a dozen devices behind it between, his family, his kids, whatever.
So the first thing I want to say here is that a lot of these SDKs are opt-in, right? And they're supposed to be all about consent and knowledge. The fact that the owner and operator of this home network had zero idea why there is a thing selling his home bandwidth is a key indicator that he didn't consent to this activity,
Yeah.
or at least knowingly consent.
They're
So
supposed to be opt-in. They're supposed to be, I mean, all these companies they claim like, the big ones to claim that it's very ethical, right? Everyone who is part of the proxy pool knows they're part of the proxy pool. And in our experience, that just hasn't been true. And in fact, I don't think I've ever come across anyone who's been like, "Oh yeah, I totally meant to be a bright data proxy," right? That doesn't seem to happen that often. So let's go into this a little bit. So this is an EIP. They have an SDK of the same name. So just like Kooky, same thing. You have an app that you want to monetize. The developer of these apps will install this SDK into their game or whatever it might be, and they start getting income just from that. So their primary pool is sourced through this SDK that they have, and they all have these sort of vagary like in their verbiages of what they do. So NEIP, this is directly from the website, says they work silently in the background and utilize unused resources, which is similar to what all the other ones say too. None of them really come out and say random strangers will be sending web requests through your device for pennies on the dollar, at any given moment. So we worked closely with this user over the week, hunting for indicators in his network. We could see the indicators for this REST proxy service on the devices. It was just a matter of finding which device actually had it. We narrowed it down to an iPhone based on a MAC address, and then basically one by one, he would go in and uninstall apps or disable apps, and see. We'd wait a day and see if we still got the indicators coming out of his network. Eventually, we found a paid Solitaire app that when he, uninstalled it, the indicator stopped, right? So this was the primary suspect now at this point. So we dug in a little bit more to this app. Um, Going to the terms of service, this is the name of the app, Solabon Solitaire. So we actually went to their TOS, and you can see here in their TOS, uh, here line number 12 is you know, we're testing a new analytics tool from NEIP. And it's funny that how they describe it. It's an analytics tool Data is captured anonymously and can identify improvement opportunities, whatever that means. So nothing in here that says, hey, your phone's now a proxy for anyone who can, pay any IP a couple bucks. Um, just a really sort of interesting verbiage they have in here, which, they say it, but they don't actually say anything about it.
So one of the things I think is super interesting about this is that I often tell like people like, if something's free, like you're the product. This wasn't even free. This user paid $10 for it and the app developer decided to monetize it further. What in the world? Like they're already charging for the game. If it was a free game, I could kind of squint and see why they would look to monetize it. But at already a 9.99 per install, it seems kind of outrageous.
Yeah, it's shocking. But, ads are like so no one likes ads, right? Like you download a game or whatever, no one wants to sit there and wait for an ad to play. They hate that. These res proxy SDKs are a great way to make money off your app because no one knows they're there. They're completely transparent. Like the user has no idea what's going on. So they're really good vectors for monetization for that reason. So,
I
10
remember seeing,
bucks.
I remember seeing a lot of the like pushes for these SDKs as like, don't, inundate your users with ads anymore, give them a better user experience. But from my experience, looking at these apps that have these in there, especially with the free apps, they have the ads too. So they're just monetizing every angle they can of these free apps, which
Yeah,
is just kind of the junk of the App Store, really.
definitely. So yeah, no indication anywhere. Even the TOS, there's still no indication that your phone's a proxy now. I mean, it's there in the TOS, sort of, but not really. So yeah, we got curious and sort of checked the web archive for when that line was added to their TOS. It was added sometime between June and July of this year. So before that, there wasn't anything in the TOS. Presumably, maybe AnyIP SDK wasn't already in the app at this point. If you go back and look at the update history of the app, here you see on June 30th, which is right between those two dates, nothing in it says, hey, we added an SDK that's going to turn your phone into a proxy. They just say the generic canned sort of boilerplate stuff there about bug fixes. Um, so the thought is that they snuck in this SDK and it's enabled by default. So our user had to go, like once he reinstalled the app, he had to go and actually go into the analytic or the settings here and disable that optional analytics button, which again says nothing about being a proxy. But by default, this was enabled. So anyone who had this app and got this update, they could have had an app that wasn't a proxy before and now it is just overnight by updating that SDK. So it's just impossible to know really what's going on. That's why you have to be really choosy with what you download on your apps or on your devices. Because at any moment, the developer can say, I want more money and put in a res proxy SDK overnight.
Do we know if the user here was did he does he use the game on a regular basis, or was this just on his phone in the background that never really touched and the update happened and installed silently and it just kept running? Because I don't know how iOS works, like how that runs in the background like that. And we have a couple questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I see those
Um,
questions. I don't know the exact answer to that.
Sean, okay, go ahead.
I think basically based on what I can derive from talking to this guy, this was something that he downloaded and sort of forgot about. Um, so my thought is that it was running in the background and it was just always on essentially. And it wasn't a matter of the app being open and someone actively, playing the game for it to be working. This was just, it was always calling out, always calling out. So it was just a background thing. We got people finding REST proxies on their network right now in real time using our data. That's funny. And our questions here. All right, let's move on.
For the person that has the Emphatica proxy and Node Maven, email us.
Yes.
We'll love to go through this process. And there's an opportunity to spread more awareness that we'd love to like expand onto. So just
Yep.
shoot.
Shoot us an email and we can do this process with you as well. So yeah, some takeaways just from this. Even the highly technical people, this is not just my mom who's vulnerable or your grandma or whatever. people who have been in this industry for a while, they know what they're doing. They're smart. They're smart enough to wiretap their entire home network. This can still happen to them. And why wouldn't it, right? It's just an app that you install on a phone that you would otherwise have no idea is doing this in the background. Nothing in the game store, the Play Store says this. Nothing in their TOS might say it, you know. It just is. It just exists. Um, Another takeaway is that apps that, you know, were fine before cannot be fine overnight and suddenly can be REST proxies. So it's hard to keep on top of it. It's a really
I
tough
don't know
problem.
if you're cut out on everybody or if it was just me, but I did lose the last like sentence you said, Sean.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now? Are you good, Riley?
Okay. Sorry. So one of the things I did want to mention on this though is that we have an employee of AnyIP on here, and I just want to say, hi Ben. I hope you found this informational about your SDK. So cool.
Riley,
Uh,
can you hear me or am I gone?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and you know, we're not calling out Ben or any IP specifically. This just happened to be the example here. And you know, like there's tons of services doing this. Uh, they all sort of fall into this gray area. So it kind of is what it is at this point.
I did joke that we should do a only murders in the building style webinar after this. That's only proxies in the building and do a full on hunt on our example of how we go through the process and stuff. Especially as we do a few more of these and get an idea of what the repeatable process is, it would be great to like actually get that a go and see if we can, help others with this exact same thing.
Yeah, this is a really hard problem, and it's becoming bigger and bigger as these services grow and scale. You know, with AI needing more and more resources for scraping and everything. So, really interesting problem set right now.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the more malicious and malware-oriented proxies for a little bit. So we had one of our big FI customers reach out to us about a list of services that they saw in the on the dark web that also mentioned their company name. So Xsocks was listed next to their company name as like a service used to create accounts, and they just asked what our coverage was of it, and to be honest, I hadn't heard of Xsocks. So I was like, let's dig in and figure this out more. And when I say I really mean Sean. Although, I mean, it is mutual in times, but Sean was the one that first started. And he started looking into the service a bit and noticed that so many of the IP addresses were located in Saudi. And in the back of my head, I go, that sounds like something else we label. Something else has a disproportionate number of Saudi IPs. And I just couldn't think of what it was. He keeps going on and he ends up walking me through it and shows me the UI. And I go, oh, yeah, I think this is Big Mama proxy. And so I went through kind of the same experiment that we did earlier with the uh, other proxy service, and I installed Big Mama VPN inside Corellium. So Big Mama proxy is primarily sourced by their free VPN software, which doesn't violate terms of service. That sits more firmly in what the Google Play expects. Because Big Mama VPN is touted as a peer-to-peer service, even though it uses static IPs for their VPN exits. But any customer of the Big Mama proxy, any customer that has $10 in Bitcoin can just buy access to any device if they want to. Um,
And Corellium
so
is a Android emulator service that we use to do some security stuff with Android devices and iOS devices.
Yeah, so we use this for all different things. If you look at this particular screenshot, Sean called me out on it that I used an emulator that we were analyzing BBVPN in. This has nothing to do with BBVPN. It just happens to be the emulator I decided to install Big Mama in because why not cross-contaminate everything you do? So I installed Big Mama VPN and it was running here. I also had the network monitor going at the same time because I just love to see what other traffic's going to pop up. So I went to grab the IP address and I used the IP context.me or the spur.us/context/me, got back my Amazon IP for the sandbox, and went right into the UI, which is not changing. Here we go. In the Xsocks screen, I went in and I searched on that Amazon IP address and I found it and I purchased it with exclusive access. So theoretically, nobody else could also get it during that time. Um, Usually it's they mask off the bottom two octets, but luckily I was the only IP address currently for sale on Amazon, so it was really easy to find. And I went ahead and purchased it. So I could see that that IP address is the same that was in the emulator, so I can tell that Big Mama is sourcing IPs for Xsocks. And the next step was I use the proxy. I use the proxy to hit ICANN has IP, which is one of my favorite IP checking sites. And I can see that action go right through the network monitor, which is really interesting. I was like, Sean, I have to show you this. And I got him on a Zoom, which he hates when I just like drop a Zoom link on him. Always feels compelled to join my calls whenever I do it. Showed him that I could do anything through the proxy and immediately catch it in the network monitor. And he's like, cool, that's kind of what network monitors do, which really just kind of spoils the mood. But I just thought it was kind of telling that Xsocks was already being labeled. We did a great job generally. We were labeling 80% or so of the Xsocks that Sean had gotten as Big Mama. Uh, Using this knowledge, we actually went ahead and analyzed Big Mama a little bit further, and I think now we're at like 95 or 98% coverage. So by doing this exercise, it actually helped us label Big Mama even better.
Uh, Really, I just want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to talk about one thing. So when you buy res proxies, there's really two ways that you can buy them. The first is like a rotating pool where you get access to all the provider's pool, and every request will go through a different proxy, or maybe there's like a 15-minute session for each proxy, right? The second way that we see a lot more commonly with like malware proxy services is you pay per IP. So you can actually go and browse like country, state, city level, even down to like zip code and down to ASN, down to other anything you can filter on basically for the device, and buy that one IP for as long as that IP is up. So in Xsocks case, that's what you can do. You can go and buy per IP. So you can get really hyper targeted IPs that way, as opposed to relying on your rotating pool to sort of get lucky with where you exit. This is why it's really popular for things like bank fraud, because you can be where your victim is. You can be in the same city essentially using this method.
And you guarantee the stickiness for a lot longer period of time. So usually, when you buy one of these, you buy that device's access for about 24 hours, which if you're going to do bank fraud, it might take a little bit longer using some of these traditional services, not to correlate any IP or any of these other services with banking fraud. But like a lot of times, if you use their session locking tool, like you really only get like about 10 to 30 minutes tops that you're guaranteed the same device. And with these services, you get that same device that whole day. Although, because they're mobile, it might have some fluctuation with moving as that device moves. And so if they're traveling or they're going to a coffee shop, you're going to get a little different IP, but at least you are still pinned to the same device. So you should stay in the same geo. Um, I always get excited when either of us or somebody reports a service and we log in and we see that you can buy per IP address because it's almost exclusively used by criminals. Like there's almost never one of these services that's legitimate in any way. And so anytime I see a UI like this, I get really excited because by us labeling it, it's going to do way more good than in labeling some of these other services that are just generic. So, speaking of those exact types of services, NSocks is one of them. Our friends at Lumen disrupted them in November of 2024, and I still don't exactly know how that happened. They did a whole sinkhole operation, and they came back up within 12 to 24 hours. And all we can think of is like what's going on, like how are they so resilient? And it turns out they actually, because their victims stopped being able to call back to them, they were able to just they plugged in IP-IDEA, NetNut, and GeoNode. So all of a sudden all of their proxies started showing up as one of those labels that we had as well. But the thing is that I just talked about is the proxy stickiness doesn't really exist with those services. They really only can guarantee them for like that 10 to 30 minute period of time. So NSocks before, you bought somebody's hacked router. It was super stable unless that DHCP lease was going to expire or something happened there. You got the same IP address that whole 24 hours. But now, if you buy one of these IPs for a 24-hour period of time, it could be rotating every 10 minutes. And it didn't bind geo or things like that. So you might have bought something in the United States that ends up going out Spain or France and then back to the United States throughout that time window. And they actually lost a lot of customers because of it. NSocks became kind of their quality went down. They were known for having very, very sticky IP addresses. And by having to fall back, although it looked like their service never really suffered as a disruption, it really did because the quality of those proxies just kind of went away. And here's an example. So they actually started showing proxy quality. And one of those things that they rated on is IP, like if it's a rotating proxy or not. So they still have these in their store, but it only accounts for about a quarter or less of the proxies that they advertise are these rotating types. So as you like click through the service, it always shows like how many times is it rotated in, a short window of time. So here's two of these IP addresses, one rotating 95 different IPs, another one 189. And if we were to buy these IPs and look them up, I imagine they're going to be labeled as GeoNode or IP Idea, one of those resellers that they were using. However, recently we got people saying, hey, NSocks is back. And I was like, I don't believe you. They just use GeoNode. And I went in there and now they have these stable, high quality proxies. And when I look at them, they were clean of labels other than NSocks. So now they have their pullback. And previously they used NGIO Web, the NGIO Web botnet. I'm working actively with Lumen right now. We hope to disrupt or do something again, but we have to see what is sourcing it. Is it NGIO Web? Were they able to push an update out? What kind of caused this to happen? So we're currently in the investigation phase here, but based on this chart, these IP addresses, like they're starting to spike again. And like I said, only about a quarter of them are the rotating type, and the rest of them are these very stable, very clean proxies. So I imagine these are going to start showing up again. These were highly sought for financial fraud prior to the Lumen operation. So I imagine that as people discover that they're stable again and they're clean and they're going through this process of, advertising more and trying to get their customer base back, that activity is going to start spiking again as well. So something to be on the lookout for is just NSocks proxy, usually hacked routers, at least from historically speaking. So we'll report on what we see as we learn more. So, Sean, I think that something that we should really talk about for a moment is like this idea of proxy counts. Like, I keep seeing, I mean, the longer we're in business, the more our competitors are popping up. But I keep seeing these charts of, oh, we label 200 million IP addresses, we label, 50 million or 70 million, and all these huge numbers. And like, they compare it against Spur, and I get frustrated because I'm like, you're comparing our 1 day count with your count of all time proxies. Like these things rotate so fast. IPs from today aren't applicable necessarily a week from now because we got the guy to clean up his AnyIP IP, and that's now going to churn. People that have
Yeah.
bigmama VPN as they go to different places, if they travel to Ohio for a weekend, that's going to have a proxy now in Ohio, but it doesn't mean it is forever. So really having fresh data and knowing how many are in the exact moment really makes a difference.
Yeah, the timeliness of this data is paramount. So I mean, it's so ethereal, this data, right? Like, it's not really relevant after 48 hours typically most of the time. So our data, it has to be super, super timely. That's why we don't keep this stuff around for longer than 2 days at a time, really.
Yeah, and to kind of give you an idea of some of the size of these pools, so for the last 90 days, we've had 233 million unique IP addresses, so huge counts. I can't believe NetNut had a pool of 93 or almost 94 million IP addresses that are unique over the 90 days. Like I was expecting Oxy Labs or Illuminati or sorry, Bright Data to be at the top of the list. I was not expecting NetNut to be so high.
They're massive. I mean, I'm just typing a response right now to someone talking about NetNut. NetNut feels like it's grown a lot the last couple of years. I feel like more and more they will buy from any provider pool that they can get their hands on. We see a huge overlap with IP idea these days with NetNut. Um, they're massive. They're really trying to bump their numbers up, I guess.
I what I think is really interesting though about NetNut is like I was thinking that they might be on the shadier side, but they're a publicly traded company and I think should be under more scrutiny than some of these other services. So it's hard to believe that, they'd be buying from Badbox and these others, but we're starting to see that overlap with Badbox and NetNut. And I don't know if it's just NetNut buying from IP Idea's pool and ignoring the fact that it's coming from compromised devices or less than ethical sources. But it's wild to me that it's seen everywhere. And yeah,
Yeah, they like I said, I feel like I used to hold them sort of in higher regard than I do now, I guess is another way to put that.
yeah. I looking at some of these other numbers. NEIP cracking the top 10 is still pretty good, like almost 16 million unique over 90 days. I don't know what their churn rate is though. Their churn rate is really how we gauge a lot of these things of how timely things are. Like some of these, the old NSocks, before they started using these rotating ones, were very stable. So, that data is actually worth more for a little bit longer. But a hacked router is likely to stay at the same IP address for a lot longer until that router gets fixed, replaced, or whatever. But a lot of the ones that are attached to phones are going to have that high churn rate, and that's where it really makes a difference of having the most up-to-date, fresh, and clean data. So I'm going to pass this over to Scott for a couple of last moments, and then we can dive into questions that people have.
That's great. Thank you, Riley and Sean. So great opportunity for you guys to start thinking about questions you want to submit here through the submission portal here in Zoom. I know a lot of you have been submitting questions already. That's great. Keep doing that.
I've been answering a lot of them too. Sorry, Scott.
Yeah, good. No, that's all good. All good. Nothing better than good live questions to get an answer right away. That's awesome. Three things I want to share with you folks as you're kind of thinking about your questions here last minute. First thing is where to get your hands on Spur data. We have a free community UI where you can sign up using your company email. You can get access to free IP lookups and get some insight into the richness of the data that we offer. All of that tremendous database of information that we have available to help you better secure your environments. Second thing I want to share with you is the blog, right? spur.us/blog. All of the the research that we do, the events that we observe, all of that stuff is accumulated there on the blog, and then we publish blogs on a regular basis. And the third thing I want to mention to everybody is your suggestions. So if you like what you saw today and you want to suggest a particular topic for us to cover in these future webinars, please provide that feedback. You can put that feedback here in the Q&A or the chat, or you can email us, contact us at I think communications@spur.us, and we'll accumulate those and work those into the next quarterly Spur Relay, right? So get your hands on Spur data, watch the blog for really recent timely updates, and then make some suggestions to future Spur Relay webinars. That's really all I wanted to share with you today, a little bit about us, and turn it back over to Peter. Peter's going to open up for questions, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I did launch our final poll. So based on what you've seen and what you've heard about Spur today, are you interested in a follow-up from someone on our team? So just answer that honestly. If you say yes, we will give you a call or send you an email. Looks like the questions are coming in. I think Sean and Riley have done a good job answering them in real time, but I'll let you guys, both Sean and Riley, look through those and see if there's anything they want to address, since they are coming in rapidly. Anything that jumps out?
There's a really good one here that says, have you heard of any res IP proxy nodes becoming the target of a criminal case, because someone bought a malware proxy, did something bad, and then it tied back to an innocent person who had no idea that their router was pwned. And the answer is yes, we have heard of that happening. I don't know how much detail we want to go into, but we have heard from various partners that that has happened in the past, um, where, you know,
One of my favorite stories about that, which I will actually share, one of our friends from the bureau went to a house and was investigating a case, and the homeowner was very upset and was like, "This is the fifth time this month that somebody's come to our house," and that's a bad sign. At that point, like nobody had tied that to like a cyber case up until that point, and luckily, that bureau agent was able to be like, "Hey, I think we got something here," and was able to dive in. And it ended up being one of the kids had torrented some video game software, and it had some value add in it, and it tied them to one of the more criminal proxy networks. And anybody that wanted to come out of that, area was buying that home IP address to use. So.
uh,
How much overlap are there between these proxy counts? Those proxy counts that I listed before, a lot of them, like as you saw with the like any IP or the cookie example, and there's three different labels on the same IP address, there is a lot of overlap. And the total count was that 230 million unique IPs. Some of those IPs might have been labeled by three different services. Some of them might just be exclusive. Bright Data is really good at sourcing their own, but it doesn't necessarily mean that a Bright Data IP is exclusive to Bright Data because people that install games that have that SDK in it are typical to install games that have other SDKs in them. So it's not necessarily that they're being resold, but that people love their free games.
See, I got someone asking about NetNut. They're seeing a lot of web scraping coming from NetNut. Their question is, how expensive is it to run a headless browser through 10,000 plus US residential IPs? And my answer is $5 maybe. I mean, what does NetNut charge per gigabyte these days? Like $5 per gigabyte.
I
And
thought
then
it was
you
like 350 or $4.
It's cheap. It's cheap.
Yeah.
And then if you set up a, a free box in DigitalOcean or whatever, and pay $10 a month, it's really, really cheap to get up and running with like really robust web scraping these days. Um, Not just the small shops doing it, but obviously the massive AI companies who are doing this at a huge scale are all customers of these big services like Bright Data and NetNut. So the answer to that question is it's not expensive. It's the barrier of entry is extremely low these days for getting web scraping up and running at
I
scale like that.
remember when I first analyzed this in about 2020, the price per gigabyte was about $15 for something like Bright Data. And now Bright Data, I think, is like 250 or $3. And when I talked to their team on a fairly regular basis, and they're like, actually, it's the reason why is AI scraping. The pressure for AI scraping has really pushed the price per gigabyte down, and it's a race to the bottom with all the proxy providers. And even the more ethical, so to speak, providers have to compete with these less ethical ones that can get, the bandwidth very cheap and don't have to pay very much for it because they're using stolen devices. So everybody's, it's a race to the bottom for pricing.
Another interesting question here says, can you just check open ports to identify the proxies? And the answer is no. These are residential proxies, so they live behind a NAT or a gateway typically. So, usually you have to you can't go through that NAT and see the ports on the other side, right? So this is a whole different threat model than your traditional VPN or proxy service because of that. So
Yeah, it's more malware in a sense because it holds open a connection back to C2. And the fact that I refer to residential proxies as C2 probably tells you that I think of this as malware.
yeah, I mean, they operate the exact same, calling it malware, is sort of a judgment call based on whoever's talking about them, but they operate identically, essentially.
Real quick on is there going to be a replay? We're going to send out a copy of this presentation or a recording of it to all of the audience. So they're gonna anybody that missed the first part or any aspects of it can rewatch. So um, question about with an enterprise or paid version of Spur, do we get to see IPs for VPN providers? So yeah, we do at our enterprise level sell data feeds, and our lowest tier data feed is our anonymous feed, which is traditional VPNs and traditional data center proxies and services like that. So if you're looking for a list of Molvat IPs, absolutely doable, or any service like it. Check out the recordings from the last webinar for Astral VPN descriptions. I don't know, Peter, can people see previous ones or sign up to get the recordings?
Yeah, so the previous session we did is not hosted. Only you would have to register for it, but we're working on it. So we're going to have a page on a site that's on our site that's got the library of past webinars. We don't have it
Awesome.
yet.
Yeah, we
But
talked
in
a
the
lot.
meantime, yeah, if you're interested in the previous sessions, just send an email to communications@spur.us and I'll be happy to send it out.
Well, yeah, we talked a lot about more traditional services last time, like the Astral VPN and things like that. So that would be a good one to kind of get a sense of what we cover there and what we detect. Sean, do you see any others?
Yeah, someone asked what like the percent of traffic per volume or per threat actor is. I'm not sure I'm reading this question correctly, but I think it's, behind a gateway, what percentage of traffic is related to the proxy versus maybe normal traffic? The answer is there's really no way to know without a deep insight into that gateway's network and the traffic coming in and out of it. That's why these are so insidious, is that you can blend in, quote malicious traffic with normal traffic, and it just fits right in with everyone else. So it's really impossible to know for sure, uh, at a IP level view, what traffic from a gateway is associated with a res proxy versus just being normal user traffic.
We actually had somebody chime in that's in our law enforcement group that actually said that he served several search warrants at houses that didn't know their router was compromised. So direct feedback from law enforcement right now. And I know the individual, and he's actually local law enforcement, so not even federal. Um, oh, that's a good one. How do you guys confirm which services are hosted when there's more than one on an IP? Oh, Sean, you already said you're going to answer it. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I actually sort of typed this out earlier in one of the answered questions as well. Um, The answer is it's tough. It's tough to know. We do a lot of analysis on our backend with our own data, kind of seeing overlap between different proxy services. It's hard to know if you have a large gateway and you've got a bunch of REST proxy indicators behind it. Is it one device with all these proxies installed? Is it one device with one proxy installed that is being resold to 10 different providers? Is it multiple devices, each with their own proxy on it? Um, like I said, kind of like the last answer, it's hard to know without deep insight into the network itself. So really tough problem to answer, tough question to answer.
Um, Great question by one person. Can you talk about the evasion disruption techniques res proxy providers are implementing to slow you guys down? So I don't really want to talk about this because I don't want to give them ideas. But
Yeah,
some of the
yeah.
things I've been noticing more and more, though, are traditional or large players using things like Cloudflare and others to route the traffic so that it actually makes it hard for people doing that network analysis and stuff to just look at IPs alone because IP-based C2 doesn't really exist in Cloudflare. You'd have to see what DNS is being looked up and things like that. But it's also becoming harder and harder for the providers to do that because of that race to the bottom. Every step in between that they add for hosting costs adds up. So if they have to have Cloudflare managing all the bandwidth that they're selling as well, that's another person taking the cut and doesn't really allow them to do that at the price points that they, need to sell it at to be competitive.
Here's a good one. Someone asked two-part question. How rapidly is our API updated when we see new indicators? Riley, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so it's actually instantaneous with our API and our web dashboard because the dashboard is powered by the API. So as we find and discover new IP addresses, it's immediately available there. Our customers of our daily feeds, we hit that in the next daily snapshot, but the API is literally that second. So it's really fun for our research team to write a new rule, detect a new VPN service, and be able to immediately go to the dashboard and see it being labeled live. And that's something that like the impact of is just, I think, still crazy. How quick we can turn something around.
And the second part of this question was, what best practice guidance do you recommend for businesses when deciding whether to block an IP address based on our data? And that's a lot harder to answer. The quick answer is that we have tunnels and we have client proxies, right? Tunnels are your traditional VPNs or data center proxies. these are things that are much easier to block. Like if you want to block Molbad or Express or Proton or any sort of data center proxy provider, that's really easy because everything coming from that IP address is Proton, is Express, is whatever, right? Blocking based on client proxies, based on residential proxies, is much, much harder because you have these large gateways. You know, you can have a house with 5 devices behind it, or you can have a mobile tower that's got 1,000 devices behind it. And it's super tough to say at a business level, I'm going to block this IP because of this one res proxy indicator. And this is why, res proxies know this. This is why they're so successful and so insidious, is because they know it's impossible to block at an IP level. So for that, our tool Monocle is really useful for that. We have a JavaScript CAPTCHA-like product that helps with this decision-making process at a larger gateway level. So my recommendation would be to use our data for VPNs and then use Monocle for blocking proxies.
I actually see a great question real quick about ipcontext.me and how it's only showing their IPv4 address and how that's a CG NAT, but they have a dedicated v6. There are v6 res proxies, and that actually really does help if you can know that that's dedicated, because CG NAT becomes kind of a solved problem when you know the individual IPv6 address that has that res proxy on it. We do need to update our IP context to support v6. Not sure why we don't have it available. We probably just need to put a quad A record in. So, ooh, a bunch of questions just came in.
Yeah, I'm having trouble keeping up here myself. You guys doing a great job fielding these, though.
Okay, let's see. Ooh, the home router question. That's a really difficult one. I don't have best practices really running outdated router software or even just ancient routers are problematic. Like NSocks pays people for vulnerabilities in router software. So it's just trying to stay on top of it. And if you become a part of one of these services or detect it, switch vendors, although no vendor is immune. So
Cool. Looks like we're creeping up on the top of the hour. You see anything as a final question we could grab out of this pile? If not, again, if your question wasn't answered, please do send us an email at communications@spur.us. We'd be happy to get back to you.
There's a question again about the count on NetNut, and the numbers that we gave about the 93 million IP addresses was over a 90-day window. And those are 93 million unique IPs that we saw in that time window. I think you'd have to go to our dashboard and see what the current count is, but our dashboard shows what is the number in today's feed for a particular service. So that's always current. I would love to update our dashboard to also include 90-day counts and things like that, just to give that bigger number, give a better sense of some of these proxy providers' reach and things like that. But I'll add it to the backlog of all the web features we need to do. Garrett, if you're on the call, add it on. All right, Sean, is there a way?
Someone asked with Monocle, are we fingerprinting individual devices? So Monocle works in a lot of ways, but typically the most power for Monocle is we can detect res proxies at a session level and not at an IP level. So it doesn't really have anything to do with individual device fingerprinting like other libraries would do, but it's more of a session interrogation that lets us detect res proxies at a session level.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of great information. I was personally fascinated by a lot of the stuff you guys were going through. So hopefully everyone else found it to be equally as interesting. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'll give you a couple minutes back before you all have to run off to your next meeting or whatever you have next. But thanks again, Riley. Thanks, Sean. Looking forward to our next session. We're going to be doing this quarterly. This particular type of webinar we'll be doing quarterly, but we'll also be doing webinars in a more frequent fashion. So look in your inbox for invites to those. And thanks again, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.